Hey
Bam.
everyone. Today I have Stefan Judas with me, and it's a pleasure to invite Stefan over here. We have a conversation that started over an article, actually his web weekly newsletter, and I thought it'd be interesting to bring Stefan on to talk about this stuff that I found really interesting, and maybe it'll be help to you. So, Stefan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. I am Stefan. So first of all, I sit here all by myself in a new apartment. So I sound probably a little bit echoey. I look a little blue, but I'm going to get that fixed very soonish. But I am based in Berlin, Germany, and I do web dev stuff, right? I usually write things down on my blog and I run a newsletter, and I hang out on Twitter a lot, which probably let me here.
It is interesting because I have never done this before, and then I went to Twitter and I saw that part, the article that you wrote, and I thought this is such a big thing. So to give people more context, is the article, the link is the newsletter, that issue is called "Say Goodbye to Resource Caching Across Sites and Domains." And the whole idea is if your sites live on modern hosting that provides a CDN and supports HTTP2, you should drop the third parties and ship all the resources yourself. And relying on a third-party resource like unpkg or jsDelivr offers very little value in 2020. So would you like to tell us more about this? Because like resource caching is like, it's also big words and stuff. So it'd be good if you can elaborate a little bit more about it.
For sure. Let's recap a little bit. So when I started, how long are you doing web development?
Me, I think it's about 8-9 years like now. Man,
Yeah,
that's a long time.
it's crazy, isn't it?
Crazy.
So I'm in the same camp. So, and when I started doing web development, so jQuery was still kind of the de facto standard, and was like, yeah. I also worked in projects that had jQuery and prototype, so which is basically the same thing as jQuery, just from different people. So, and what we did back in the days was like, hey, jQuery also had its own CDN, right? It was CDN jQuery something or something. So they had their little own thing going on, and it was always like the idea was like, hey, drop this little snippet here, which is like load jQuery min latest into your sites, and usually people that will come to your sites don't have to download jQuery again, because this snippet most likely will be included on other pages as well, which then results in a cache hit, so that everything becomes super speedy. And this, unfortunately, is not true anymore. So what we all did at the time then was kind of relying on unpkg and all these kind of third-party resources to say, hey, well, probably the cache is warm and probably can reload things for particularly popular things, let's say React or something. You could also drop it in if you don't want to do a build pipeline. But a few years ago, browsers starting to change how the browser cache works, actually. So initially, like when we two started doing web development, was like one cache for all, right? One URL, this is the resource, let's just cache all the things. Super nice. But as it is always with web development features, they always can be used for harmful things. And I guess that at some point people figured out that if certain people know a URL to a resource, let's say an SVG icon that is only behind your banking login, right? If I know this URL, I could figure out, hey, how quickly is this resource being loaded on my page? Is it sitting in the cache? And if I get a speedy response, I can almost be sure, because resources these days are usually like resource dash and some hash that is file dependent, right? We're all doing these unique file names. So there was a privacy concern coming up, and this is when browsers starting to change. And basically the idea that resources can be cached across domains and sites pretty much died. I think it was Safari which started that and was like, no, we partition our cache now. So when we all know load jQuery, it's like jQuery from your side, jQuery from my side, jQuery from Facebook. I doubt that Facebook uses jQuery, but that is a different story. And Safari was, I think, the first one doing this, but slowly but surely all the other browser vendors followed. And well, caching across sites and domains is not a thing anymore, because all browsers partition their browser caches, which then leads to, for the jQuery example, having your browser cache storing 50, 100 different jQueries in your browser cache.
So what you're saying is, even if you use jQuery from the CDN and using jQuery on your site, it's the same, because they will cache it in a way where it is specific to your URL or your domain name. Is that right?
Yeah. So the way that works is that, and I'm not a browser engineer, right? I just read a little bit about it. So the way that works is that resources are stored in your browser with a certain cache key. So in this cache key these days is usually the resource URL in combination with something else. So you could have resource URL, which is unpkg.jquery.com, in combination with your URL of your site, which then means you have jQuery-your site, jQuery-my site, and it doesn't really matter if it's the same resource or not. The cache key is different, which then means that different resources will be, same resources will be cached under different keys, which then is duplication of all these kind of resources in your browser cache.
Let's backtrack a little bit. Like, why do browsers even make it so complicated when like cdn.jquery.com was like serving everyone? So that's a question that comes up in my mind sometimes. Is it because of privacy concerns, or like people trying to, I don't know, insert some malicious scripts or something into the cache?
I think the main reason here is pretty much just the privacy concern, and it bugs me a little bit, because it's particularly Apple and Safari, right? We have some good stuff going on in terms of browser technologies lately, and if you consider it, everything, or it feels to me like most of the things become a privacy concern, right? So the thing is, if there's a technology out there that can be used to track people, people will track people no matter what. But I feel like we're missing kind of a solution. And the thing is that when Apple and Safari kind of say, nope, not doing that, that's harming our users' privacy. iOS and Safari Mobile, for example, have a huge market share. And this is always like a big breaker. Other things that are happening right now. Are you familiar with Project Fugu, for example? So Project Fugu is this Google initiative where they're bringing up a lot of new browser APIs that kind of give PWAs, so progressive web apps, superpowers and really make them like desktop apps. For example, you could maybe in the future kind of have progressive web apps running in your macOS menu bar in top area, or you could access the file system from your progressive web app. All these kind of things are super nice for us as web developers, right? Because potentially we could build desktop applications running with
very cool.
Running without Electron and all this stuff that we have to do right now. But all these kind of, there are a bunch of new APIs. Really, there's a bunch of stuff in there, like the menu tray, file system access, battery access, all these kind of things that you need when you really want to do a desktop application. But while Google is pushing very, very hard for this new technology, usually Apple is on the other side, was like, no, can be used to track people. No, can be used to track people. And I feel like we're right now in this kind of limbo state where it's like, we haven't figured out the way to kind of push technology without harming our users and their privacy. I don't have the answers, but sometimes I'm just a little bit sad to see like, yeah, we cannot do that because it can be, again, used to track people. At the end of the day, everything can be used to track people. And I feel like as long as, now I'm getting a little bit further out here, but as long as kind of our entire world probably depends on ads and tracking, I feel like that this will hold technology back a little bit, because if people can track you, they will track you.
Well, like, we can go into a complete different direction from where we started and talk about tracking, because like, to me, I'm thinking like, what was so bad about tracking in the first place?
I'm a little bit in your camp there too. Now we open up religious questions, right? So first of all, I think I think privacy on the web is over anyways. So I have a Google phone, right? I have an Android phone. I have Mac OS. I don't believe that I'm not tracked, whatever I do online. I think someone knows what I'm doing online either way. But I do understand that a lot of people feel very, very strongly about just being watched. I can totally emphasize with this opinion from a technical standpoint. I'm like, yeah, well, privacy is over anyways. I might be wrong, right? So don't take my word for granted. But a lot of folks that I know want to be anonymous in the web, and yeah, well, the ad industry makes that kind of redundant, right? I also don't mind necessarily to see personalized ads too much, right? I'd rather see an ad that is for me than, I don't know, a barbecue grill that I have no interest in buying or something, right? So I think it's a tricky topic. What's your take?
I'm slightly different. I would ask apps not to track as much as I can if they provide the option not to track. I don't really like to look at advertisements anyway, so I kind of ignore most advertisements as much as I can. The good thing about having not websites and apps not tracking me is that I get shown random advertisements, and then I can go poke around there because my stuff is not directly just in web development. I'm interested in other areas, even though I may not necessarily be there. So I kind of go poke around there, and then I see some wooden puzzles, and then I bought a wooden puzzle, for example.
Nice.
Yeah, I made one. It's right on my floor over here right now. Let me see if I can. Oh, looks like that one on the floor over there.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so that's what's that called? That's a buffalo or bison, depending on where it is being found, and it's irregular shaped, and I just placed it together in an afternoon. Took me ages. Right.
Nice.
But now we're really digressing. I've never.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a tricky topic, right? But as long, I mean, yeah, you're also a content creator too, right? So the thing there is also how do you monetize the stuff that you do online? I totally get it, being on the other side too, right? Do you want to do ads, put ads on your stuff? For example, I have Carbon ads on my blog. They say they're not tracking too much, and it's mostly tech stuff. I don't know, but I think we fail kind of to kind of give people a way to monetize their content creations too in the web dev stuff, because people are just so used to consuming free stuff and then complaining that they're tracked or see ads. I think it's a little weird times these days,
especially in the web industry, right? I think it's especially bad here. But well, for me, I don't really put ads on my site because I try to monetize by selling stuff instead. So it's like a slightly different monetization strategy. But there is this thing called I think there was this API that I can't remember what the name was, but there was an API that we are trying to use it to give money to content creators or something similar to that. I'm not too sure how that is being worked out at this point. I'm not optimistic about it though.
You probably mean Coil or something. So there are various things out there. So also Brave also tries to do the same thing, right?
Tries to do that, yeah.
But I guess all the consumers have to, and that includes myself, right? I'm just so used to consume free stuff. Probably the solution lies somewhere. I like the idea, right? It could be like, okay, I spend $50 a month to a random thing that then distributes it to the stuff that I consumed, right? I think this might be a good idea in the future, and probably we have to wait a little bit more. But from the creator's point of view, there has to be some money coming in eventually, right? Just doing free stuff an entire lifetime is probably a tricky thing. I love doing things, but maybe I want to make a living out of it at some point.
Yeah, it's tricky. Yeah, I totally get where you're coming from. Like coming back into the H2 stuff, I still got more questions to ask over there, right? So what you mentioned is that if you have a modern hosting supporting a CDN, which I think most CDNs have HTTP2 now. So that means we do not need the third-party resource CDNs in that case. But that still means the CDN is important, right? Because we still need to do like images and all that stuff.
Yeah, so there are various things in this topic. So we could potentially take a step back again where we're coming from and then see what HTTP2 did and how CDNs comes into play. So where we started was HTTP1, and HTTP1, first of all, opens a TCP connection for every resource that is in your site, right? If you're now building a site, you can have easily 20, 30, 50, 100 resources. Could be images, could be fonts, CSS, JavaScript, whatever, right? All these kind of resources are, first of all, competing for the connections that are available. So now in HTTP1, every resource that you had was a TCP connection. So, and this usually goes like there are some handshakes happening. So your browser says to the host, "Hey, I'm here," and it goes back and forth 1, 2, 3 times to say, "Okay, this connection is established." And then there's also something going on that is called TCP slow start, which means that the server sends a packet, some bytes, right? Hey, here are the first bytes of your image, and you say, "Yeah, cool, got it," and then it will double it, and then like, "Got it, double it, got it, double it, got it." Da, 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 da. It's to the point that something fails, right? Or some packets are dropped on the way. And I say, okay, we're now here in this kind of speed, so let's do this. So the thing with HTTP1, though, was that every resource was a single connection. And this initial round trip going back and forth saying, hey, cool, this is going to work here. It takes a little bit of time depending on what server you're talking to, right? So you are on the other side of the planet than I do here in Europe. So this kind of is a long distance to do back and forth. And this is called what is usually, so this is usually called the latency. Once the connection is established, that goes fairly well, but this part going back and forth and this moment to kind of send the bytes around the planet, this is what makes things slow. So this is why then people started kind of doing in HTTP1 world, these kind of hacks. Do you remember image sprites and all these kind of things?
Yep.
We did that. So we put several SVG images or PNG images in a single file just to save these going back and forth, because then we could get this entire chunk with one file once this connection is rolling. So that so back in the days when we two started, was pretty much just like save HTTP requests because they are expensive. And then there was also another thing going on because browsers were limiting the connections to a host to something around 6 to 8 connections to a certain host. So if you're now serving 50 connections, all going to your website, you could see in the browser network waterfall diagrams, then it was like, okay, 6 connections, and everything was waiting. Then one connection resolves, okay, here's the next one, and one connection resolves this one. So you always had this kind of window of 6 to 8 connections to a single host. And this is then when we two started kind of, oh, let's work around this. Let's load jQuery from the CDN. First of all, because it's cached, but also
it's from a different host that can be loaded at the same time.
Correct. This was then called domain sharding. So a lot of times people were just loading resources from different hosts. I think it also worked for subdomains. So sometimes you saw websites that were loading from fonts.website.com and css.website.com.
Yeah,
just to kind of,
it was a long time ago that happened.
Just so that it's different connections to work around this kind of 6 to 8 connections limit thing. So this was where we're coming from. Every resource used its own HTTP 1 or TCP IP connection, and everything was going back and forth all the time. And then people were kind of looking at the state. I think it originated in Google. There was a protocol before HTTP2. It's called Speedy, or was called Speedy.
Yeah, Speedy.
It became HTTP2 at some point. And HTTP2 pretty much resolves this problem of having so many different HTTP connection or TCP IP connections for a resource, because everything from one domain is chunked into a single connection. So HTTP2 provides something that is called multiplexing. So if you have now 5 to 10 resources coming from one domain, it's all going through this one connection, but the chunks are in order. So it's like, okay, here's a little bit of the font, here's a little bit of the CSS, here's a little bit of the HTML. And then it's just this big kind of stream that is coming in. And when you now consider the fact that latency and, for example, this fact that connections have to be established, go faster and speedier over time, right? This way, when you're having, for example, a good connection, you have this one trip once, right? You, for example, you get your HTML and it's like, okay, establish the connection first, where it's like 1, 2, 3. Doing the round trip time, which is like, hey, can we talk to each other? Host and browser, da, 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 da. And then there's still, again, this process of like testing out the connection and how much bytes pass through, right? So it's like, okay, doubling the packets. Okay, how much do we actually can get through this? But then at some point, you will probably, on a good connection, you reach a nice little throughput, right? Because the connection is stable, everything's going well, and you can push way more things through this connection with all the resources that are coming from a single domain. And when you now combine all these kind of facts, for example, loading something from a third-party domain, something like jQuery, it's just another hop to establish another connection, right? It's again then going to a different domain, which is like 1, 2, 3, and then again see, okay, how much can we pass through this? This is all kind of.
So it sounds like opening another domain, like another connection to another domain, actually sounds like it's going to be slower compared to getting this whole throughput that you're talking about.
Yep, pretty much. And this is kind of the things that are making things slow is the initial connection and the latency between things. If your HTTP connection is hot and things are established and things are going through, usually these kind of things will be faster than opening another thing. Plus, if you consider the article that you wrote, that it cannot be cached across sites anymore. Third-party resources these days come with a lot of drawbacks, right? First of all, you don't own this stuff. What happens if something gets hacked or it gets offline, or third parties kind of things? You're not in control.
What happens if it decides to not be there anymore, or it changes the version number and all that stuff?
Yeah, all these kind of things. I mean, I also don't know who's paying for unpkg, for example, right? Or for all these image CDNs. Maybe they're gone tomorrow. Then you're offline. Good luck.
True.
These kind of things are definitely a thing. And then, so that is the reason why usually third-party resources come with a lot of drawbacks. And when you then consider that there's no real benefit anymore, right? So just to recap a little bit, in the past we used third parties to kind of do domain sharding, to load more things in parallel. This is not necessarily valid anymore when you have an HTTP connection, because you have a nice little data stream coming, and that is usually faster. Then what else in there? There's the third-party aspect that things are going can go down, or the misbelief that things are cached or sitting in the browser cache anymore, also not valid anymore. And that's why usually if you're going for modern hosting, usually you have HTTP2 in place, because it became it kind of snuck into web development, right? It was like 5 years ago, and everybody was like, just, whoa, this cool new thing is happening. And now we reached the point that everybody's just like, yeah, we use H2. Of course we use H2, because that's just the de facto standard.
This is the thing I kind of want to touch on a little bit and ask a little bit, because like about 3-4 years ago, I stopped looking at speeding H2 because it was so confusing. It was like there were articles saying you had to do lots of configurations to get H2 working, and then sometimes H2 was slower than H1 and yada yada yada. But nowadays there isn't anything on H2 anymore. So I part of me thought, well, H2 actually dropped off the whole thing, but it is here, like without me even knowing it. So then the question is, you mentioned about modern hosting. What do you mean? What is modern hosting in this case? Are you talking about Netlify, Vercel, those serverless clouds? What about like stuff on DigitalOcean, where you run your own Linux server? Like, would that be considered modern hosting as well, or no? Or like CDNs?
I didn't do the research here, so I'm pretty much going on in the Netlify Vercel kind of bubble and the Jamstack thing. That's what I'm using. I'm not sure about DigitalOcean. I'm pretty sure that Cloudflare is also doing H2 for quite a while. I think so I don't know how the current landscape is, but I think people just enable it everywhere. So when I remember exactly that time, because I was looking into speedy in H2 too, right? And I was like, yeah, you have to turn on this nginx config, and you have to figure that one out. And then everybody was kind of looking into HTTP push, which is still not a recommendation to be used for, as an example. So what was the question about hosting? I got sidetracked.
I basically asked you what you meant by modern hosting, and you mentioned you were talking about Vercel and Netlify, and that's cool. So one interesting point that I noticed was, I was asking about H1, or I was asking you about H2 or H1 over Twitter with you, and then you checked my site, and then you said that, hey, you're basically running H2. I'm like, what? I'm running H2? What? I couldn't believe my eyes, because in my hosting at that point, so I long story short, I upgraded my host just 1 week ago, because there were some problems with it. But before that, I was running an old nginx config that I set up about 6 years ago. So it's definitely before HTTP 2 and all that stuff came in. And what I'm saying over here is that Cloudflare gives you the H2 connection automatically in that case. So that's what I'm noticing. Then right now, when I'm checking the new tutorials on DigitalOcean, and it looks like you can enable H2 by just saying SSL, HTTP2, and that's it. There's no other thing you need to add to that equation. And I'm like half wondering, is that really true? Is it really that simple now?
Well, I guess some people in the DevOps space, I'm not a DevOps person, right? I can tell that. I haven't had to configure nginx or an Apache config for, I don't know, 6-7 years. And I was always like, I have no clue what I'm doing, right? I guess that just some folks working at these providers and these hosters just figured it out at some point to flip a config switch. I think it probably as a technology, HTTP2 just matured. And to the thing that is just turned off. And there's also HTTP 3 on the way, right? I haven't read about that yet, because it looks, again, I think we're probably in the same space as we two were like 5 years ago when HTTP 2 came up. We were like, oh, this is so confusing.
Yeah.
I think last year or something, I read a few articles about HTTP 3 and I was like, oh my God, this is super confusing. But maybe in 5 years, it's just like turned on everywhere. We're like, okay, I'm using H3. That's it. I think your site was actually on H3, wasn't it?
No, it was on H2.
Okay.
Yeah, you showed me a picture and it said H2. I'm like, what? But I did a check on H3 just before I hopped onto this call. And I'm like, oh my God, what is this?
Yeah, this UDP I don't know. I just can drop buzzwords here. I have no clue.
Yeah, all the server related language stuff and stuff like that. It really makes like learning web development somewhat complex, because I noticed that because I'm writing about asynchronous JavaScript recently, and I'm creating a course on it. And suddenly we are talking about front end, which is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, very clean, very clear. And all of a sudden we throw in HTTP, contact max, all the different caching. It's like a whole new language altogether. And then you add TCP/IP, a whole different language altogether. It's so freaking confusing for this beginning.
Yeah, I think we probably, I don't know. I definitely have. I think web development is just, there are a lot of things going on. Kind of depends on where you want to draw the line of what you want to know, right? I'm interested in most of the things going up to the network layer, right? Everything below, I'm already like, oh, server stuff, config stuff, and that's not necessarily my jam. But I think you're pretty right here that web development is way more complex than a lot of people in their first years probably realize, right? So what I see, for example, with beginner kicking it off right now, here in Berlin, a lot of people or in Europe, a lot of people just jump on the React train, right? So here you have your first level already, right? People that get started with React today probably don't know how the DOM works, probably not. And it's not their fault, right? You have to start somewhere.
Yep.
And then there's this level below, or this, how does the browser work? Then you're already like, okay, what is render blocking? And what does set timeout do? And all these kind of nitty-gritty details of browser land. Then it's the next thing. And then it's like, okay, how does networking work? And it's like, oh my God, I'm blown away. I think it just, Web development is super, super complicated if you want to kind of learn it all.
There's another layer where how the servers work, how does Node.js and Express work. Then another layer about how does the server integrate with a database.
Oh, databases, man. I no clue about databases.
I only know MongoDB because I basically tried to pick it up and I have no idea what SQL does. Like I completely gave up on SQL for a while. Well, it's not that important for me at this point because you just pick one and go, right? That's how I trained myself to work on things in the past. There's too many things to pick.
For sure. I mean, YOLO, just play around with things, right? I think this is why kind of these kind of side castles sort of thing. I played, for example, with CouchDB back in the days, where it's like, oh, that looks interesting. Document store, right? Just push it in, get it out. Sounds good.
Yeah, it sounds good to me. I was thinking of playing around with that, but I got stuck with MongoDB, so I kind of
and then all the time when I kind of talk to colleagues like server backend developers, like, you should have a relational database with Postgres, and this is going to this table, and this is going to this table, and you have a unique key here, and then a constraint there, and then you just join it together, and I'm just like, what?
I hear the words. I know the words, but I have no idea, no freaking.
Doesn't make any sense. Yeah, for sure.
Still that way for me right now. Like, oh, this key must have a relation to that key. Even if I'm using Mongo database right now, like there's this one-to-one, there's one-to-many, there's many-to-one, there's many-to-many, whatever that means, right?
Yeah, super complex. I think it's just a type of developer kind of thing. I usually lean a little bit more to the front end side of things. I like to do browser stuff. And I think since I do web development, it was proven that I don't need to know databases. And I think that's all right. Someone is probably way better. For a side project, okay, I hack something together. Will it scale? Probably not. We'll get the job done. But I'm more in the browser land for sure.
So you're more of a front end person in that case? Interesting. So like, I'm curious about how like we're totally going off the H2 and stuff right now.
Let's go for it.
Yeah, let's go for it, right? So I'm curious about how your career evolved, if you do not mind me asking. Like I always interested to know about how like where people start from, where they go and why and all that stuff. It makes it very interesting for me.
All right, so I am right now 36 years old, and I had my first career path. I was a sound engineer for television. So I mixed TV shows for German television.
Whoa.
Yeah, like sitting in front of this big mixer and kind of doing these kind of things. That was my thing. Was very stressful, was poorly paid. So I started computer science. I have a degree in computer science. Studying computer science was not very useful, to be honest. So it got me hooked of programming and building stuff, but the materials here in Berlin were not, well, it was a lot of very sciencey things. I think a lot of things I learned for in an exam and I never used again. But I got a bachelor's degree. And then I did the usual thing in here. I don't know how it is on your place, but we have a little bit of an intern culture here. So I did my first internship thing, and then in my first internship, I just got to know a crew of 4 other team members, and they just leveled me up in 6 months. They was like, hey, I was like, I know a little bit of jQuery, and they was like, yeah, we figured it out. And then we're just like, okay, Stefan, here, do this, do this, do this. And I was like, I have no clue what they're doing, but I had the safety net of 4 people that just explained me every day how things work. So it was a typical mentorship kind of thing. So they leveled me up big times. And then I did a little bit of startup hopping here. So Berlin is a startup city, so switching companies is not that hard here. And then 5 years in, something interesting happened because I was looking at my next job because I was a team lead of a few front-end developers. We were building a software as a service product. And then, so right now I work for Contentful, and then Contentful came around and was like, hey, Stefan, do you want to work for us and do the things that you do in your free time and get paid for it? So, and what did they mean by that? So in these first 5 years or something, I started blogging, right? Similar to what you do. I started speaking at meetups, conferences, a little bit of side hustles here. And basically what they offered me was like, hey, do you want to work in developer relations? And I was like, what? That's a job? How's that going to work? So, and fun fact, I started my first day then here at Contentful, and literally nobody told me what my job was. So I started, and I was like, so what should I do? And they were like, yeah, you figured it out. And I was like, okay, what should I do? So since then, yeah, I work in something that is called developer relations. So I am a software developer who likes to create content and help people and talk with everybody, like with you right now, about tech and make developers successful. That's what I do for a living.
It sounds like a good thing to do at this point. Like it's probably a dream come true for a lot of people to be in your shoes, to be honest. But well, that's the thing, right? Like,
I think a lot of people. So, how do you see it right now? I feel like the last 2-3 years there was a little bit of a trend going on. Everybody wanted to work in developer relations. I think there was a push for it. I think it's a.
I see a big push for developer relations everywhere nowadays for some reason. Maybe because of how lucrative it may be to get word out, because people who are sharing are already sharing. So probably piggybacking on the people who are doing all this stuff that they love to do to share stuff. So I'm not too sure about developer relations as a job personally.
Yeah.
So I'm not aligned to it because I'm the kind of person who doesn't go into so my path is slightly different from yours. What I did was in my final year of university, I was studying finance. I decided that, hey, I don't want to go into bank. Then I started learning to code on my own. And then I went into an internship as an admin person. And then I was like, these people are using WordPress, and they were hiring someone as a freelance company doing their WordPress sites for $50 an hour. I look at the code and I'm like, I can do better than this. Let me go freelance straight away off the bat. So
That's fun.
I've kind of been on my own, trying to level myself up from the different resources. So yeah. I always have this imposter thing in me because I do not have people around me that I can actually ask questions and level me up. So like having a conversation with you over here it's actually leveling me up in different areas that I did not know of before. So that's really cool, and I kind of want to do more of that. But so when it comes to that, I'm not so much for Devrel, because I'm like, do I like, if I did not create that thing, if I'm not too sure how much I want to sell it, unless I really buy into that thing, then yes. But most of the time, I'm kind of like half-half on other people's products, other people's stuff. And well, I love the things that I create for a reason, right? I created it for a purpose itself. So I kind of want to drive my own stuff compared to driving someone else's. But it's a bias on my side.
I totally get it. So I think now I'm derailing a little bit. So I think what I've seen over the last few years is that a lot of people kind of entered developer advocates jobs for random companies, and was like, how's that going to work? You like to talk about ABC, and this company is doing DEF, right? How's that kind of coming together? My approach, because I think for me, maybe other people are different. For me, it's very hard to kind of fake interest, right? I have to be excited about something to be able to kind of talk about it. If I'm not excited about it, well, then I'm just faking it, and that's making me unhappy just at a certain time. So I think that is important. And another thing that a lot of people, there are also different approaches to Devrel a little bit. So I'm not selling myself to whatever company I'm working to, right? If I think it's good, well, then you can ask me about it and I will tell you about it. But it's not like that I will just jump onto you and was like, hey, we have to talk about that. So that's not what I'm going to do. I think the line in this job is also kind of keep your credibility, right? Be honest. Don't bullshit people. I think it's a normal thing, but I totally see what you're saying. But I do see a lot of people that start for random companies and was like, how is that going to work? Because if you're not into it, that's probably a hard thing to do.
Yeah, I'm not too sure how developer relations work, but it is kind of hard. I'll be perfectly honest. It is kind of hard to say, I got something I need to sell, and then just go in there and put that thing out of the whole idea of like put this thing I want to sell, like even if as a product creator, I always want to sell my own stuff. As a developer advocate, you probably want to sell because that is your job for the company, right? It's really hard to put that aside and have a good conversation with someone.
Yeah, I think that's probably a depends on the individual, right? So I do Devrel now for 5 years. So I did Devrel for Contentful, Twilio, and then again Contentful. And especially in the developer communities, like the word "sell" has a little bit of like, yeah, oh, go away, yeah, don't market to me. I don't want to hear it. But the thing is, so I'm not pushing that conversation on anyone, right? I also give conference talks about, I don't know, random web performance, and everything that I do is like, hey, by the way, I work for this company. If you have this problem, check it out, right? 1 minute. I think it's fairly common. A lot of people do that. I think it's also okay for a lot of people in the audience. Like a minute is not a big deal. I'm not selling things in my job. If you have a problem and I can help you and I think it's the best solution, well, then I will mention it to you. And if you're interested, we can talk about it. But I think a lot of Devrel folks have different approaches to how they do the work. I'm a little bit more like, I'm not going on anybody's nerves. I'm just your friend here, and let's have a good time and let's talk tech. That's pretty much the thing.
I have a friend who's in Devrel. I'm not too sure if she's still in Devrel or not, but she has this approach that is pretty similar to yours, where she would be like, "Oh, I'm just trying to keep my job here, so this is my company, and then this is what we do here. But okay, let's come here and talk about your stuff," which I think is absolutely wonderful. Like I really like that kind of approach. Even if in my own blog over here right now, I try to do that, even though I'm not always successful, because there's a question about JavaScript. I'm like, yeah, hey, that's the thing I made. So go check it out. I'm at this limbo over here sometimes. So it's a very touchy space. I have no idea how to handle it.
I mean, yeah, no, same, absolutely same, right? And this entire thing, so I think there's probably some parallels, right? And I think Devrel is closer in that regard to marketing rather than selling, right? And you're doing the same thing when you describe your own blog or your own tools or your own conference talks, right? Sometimes you see someone struggling and you wrote this one blog post that is exactly giving the solution, right? But do you show now up out of nowhere? It's like, hell, I wrote this thing and that might be helpful. Of course, it's promoting yourself, right? Sort of. But it's also helpful.
Yeah. So there's this weird, like, in between going on here. Like, okay, how much do I have to listen to you to hear that you hear me, to know, to have you trust me enough to go to that thing, but I already know that thing works. So it's kind of like sometimes I don't really want to spend the energy there, but I'm lamenting and complaining right now. But well, we still have to do that, because it's about effective communications rather than anything else.
Yeah, and it probably depends on context, right? So what I usually do for example, on social media, I share when I publish something, right? Just like, hey, some new thing. If you want to check it out, check it out. For people that have questions and or are struggling, I'm very rarely just pop out of nowhere and say, hey, check out my stuff. I very rarely do this because it feels a little, but I do see a lot of people that are just like, oh, little plug here, I did this. Yep, I feel a little like, ooh.
Yeah, I see a lot of people do that as well. And I think that's one of the things I'm anxious about. So I don't really engage in social media that much. That's one of the things. And I don't really want to touch other people in the touchy topics that they have as much, because it can roll out into many different areas. And I'm kind of like, I'm not too sure how to handle all of those. But those conversations are probably like my imposter syndrome stuff, nagging around and all that stuff. And I can just go in there and help, like maybe say something If they want more info, I can always point that out in like a second tweet or something. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, this entire topic of helping is also a tricky one, right? You also don't want to be the smart ass all the time, right? Some people also not helpful, right? Even if you come from an honest, genuine place and you want to help someone, chances are also high that you're a smart ass. Can also kind of depends always on context. I think it's very tricky.
And then the problem is, because I have this thing where I do not want to be a smart ass. So usually I come in there. If I come in, I'll usually ask about the context, and then I'll get a cold reply because nobody is interested in saying more context at that point.
Yeah.
Usually in social media, but if we are going into one-to-one conversations, that works very well. So
yeah, I think that is a very smart approach. I think in social media it's a little bit harder, but I think your point on here, right? Very in personal context. Oh, this is not working. What should I do? I think the first question should usually be, what are you trying to do, by the way? To just get an idea, because sometimes that includes myself, right? Sometimes I'm just hacking away 3 hours, and then next day I was like, man, this is 3 hours of nonsense that you did here. I think context matters a lot. I think your point on here.
Yeah. And sometimes it's just take a step back, come back the next day. Oh, fuck, the answer is just that.
Yeah, for sure.
So now I want to kind of direct you to the question of how do you spend your time, because you have loads of content on your site. You have the TIL stuff, you have the Web Weekly stuff. Like,
yep.
Let's just focus on Web Weekly for now. If anyone is listening and you do not know about Web Weekly, I think you should check it out, because it's like a lot of different kinds of content about web development, sometimes not about web development, to mash into one newsletter, and it delivers stuff that, hey, maybe sometimes you do not know about this, but it'd be interesting to know. So I'm curious about how you put this entire thing together, and it's been running for I think about 60 issues now.
Yeah, a little over a year. So last year I started doing weekly editions. So right now I'm a little bit on the break. So I will do next week, but I took 2 weeks of a break because the world is a little bit crazy right now. But so I do weekly newsletters, and the goal of it was, first of all, there's one newsletter that I like a lot, and it's called Lab Notes by a guy called Asaf. And this is also just this mixed bag of interesting stuff, right? So I'm reading a lot. So I have a long RSS feed. I read like the common newsletter, like JS Weekly, Front End Focus, all these kind of things. But these kind of newsletters kind of are teaching me things, right, and discover resources. But it is not necessarily that these newsletters are fun to read, right? It's a bag. And I don't want to criticize Peter Cooper here and all the weeklies. It's a bag of links, right? A lot of nerdy stuff, and that's it. You close it. It's not like that you are kind of opening a link list and it's like, oh, let's look what's new. It's just like, yeah, cool. There's probably some good stuff that I might check out or might not do. So what I'm aiming for is something that is circling around, first of all, about TIL. So today I learned that's the thing that I do on the side, right? We both do web development for quite a little bit. So whenever I try to make it a habit, whenever I sit in front of my computer, I'm like, I did not know that. I usually try to write it down. So this is one of the habits that I constantly try to do. And I dropped kind of the idea of a blog post always being like this 500,000 words with a lot of wisdom, with a lot of code snippets. Sometimes I just put things like literally 150 words on my blog where it's like, hey, I learned this, by the way, people, see ya. That's pretty much it. But the thing here is, if you do web development for a little bit, if you learn something, you are usually not alone. So we both do web dev now 8, 9, 10 years. If I'm like, oh, I didn't know this HTML element or this CSS property or whatever it comes along, there are probably a lot of people that also didn't come across this. So that is one thing. So my newsletter, I try to kind of create this mixed bag that is first of all, teaching people unknown things. I think this is important for me, so that more people get, when they read Web Weekly, are like, huh, I didn't know that. So if I can multiply that, that would make me happy. But I also don't want it to be just this newsletter of just nerdy topics. So I think it's important to me that there's something in there that makes people smile, right? So I'm opening it, which is like, hey, I thought this was cute this day or this week. I think this is important to me. And I usually try to keep kind of like a 50-50 balance between web development stuff, but also kind of other stuff. I don't know, because I think it shouldn't be just web development stuff. And then usually I try to quote things. I'm also watching a lot of repositories on people on GitHub. I think there are a lot of projects that are on GitHub that are not necessarily showing up on Google or on NPM or something. I think that's why I'm including them. And yeah, a little bit of music at the end. So I try to make this Web Weekly kind of this email that you open on Monday morning. It's like, okay, let's see what's new. And it is particularly important to me that Web Weekly is yet now not including this one article that was trending last week that is in every other newsletter, right? I intentionally try to not use these, but rather kind of find a few little nuggets, interesting stuff, and things that makes people, I don't know, better web citizens, but also better web developers.
Yeah, the thing about not showing an article that is trending on other newsletters is what I noticed with Web Weekly. There's none of that. So
yeah, that's on purpose.
Yeah, I think it's really cool to have that. Like personally, I'm like, maybe this is trending. There's a thought on my side, like this is trending right now. Would it be still important in say 6 months time or 1 year time? I'm thinking of recording those trending stuff and then showing them later, but I'm not too sure whether that's a good strategy or not. Like, because when it comes to a conversation about a curation type of newsletter, I haven't tried that. I actually have massive fear about talking about curation because of other stuff, but I'm like really interested in looking at how that curation began as an idea. Like why is it important for you to include stuff that other people are not talking about, for example? Like, where did this, other than lab notes, do you have any other sources of inspiration that actually brought you here, or it just came to you out of the blue? How did this idea got conceived?
Well, I think, first of all, I always have this, I think I have this typical content creator thing going on. I always want to do things. And after I really started blogging, so even though there are shorter blog posts, I publish a lot of shorter blog posts. I usually publish 2 to 3 blog posts a week. Right, a blog post takes me maybe 30 minutes, maybe 2 hours, but usually I'm somewhere 2 to 3, 1 to 3 per week. So I definitely looked for something to kind of also share these with the world, right? Other than Twitter. But then as I'm also consuming a lot of things, intentionally not replicating. So you're in the creator business too, right? If you kind of read a little bit about the creator business, you will find a lot of people that talk about be in your niche or kind of make something that makes you stand out, because otherwise you're just one of a million, right? And I think there's some certain truth to that. I pick newsletters particularly because I think it is important to have a connection that is not social media, or we don't know what happens to Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, whatever's out there, right? But an email is an email. An email is something that is a direct connection to whoever is subscribed. That is always what I found appealing. And regarding the content that I want to include, really, I'm doing it constantly now for a week, and I really want to be this email that people kick off the week with, spend 30 minutes and have fun, right? And this is, I mean, if there's a trending link, there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, it's probably still good content, but it's nothing that gets people excited, particularly if they have seen it in 5 different places, because it kind of devalues and kind of puts my newsletter, and I'm far away of saying that I have cracked this entire topic, right? I'm just trying things here and there. But I think the thing that I'm aiming for is you will learn something. I think TIL and Today I Learned Things are valuable for a lot of people because they're valuable for me. Very often I'm basically trying to receive the newsletter that I like to read. And I think Lab Notes is one example of that, because Lab Notes is a little bit shorter than Web Weekly, but it's pretty much this mixed bag. It's fairly long these days, but it's this mixed bag of like tech, social, and random stuff. And then there's something to smile, then there's just something interesting, and a lot of tech news where it's like, hey, this was trending, or something. And I think that is a good one. And yeah, I want to be Web Weekly to be this email that people kick off the week with, and they're like, oh, that was fun, thank you.
That's nice, because I do think that the web is a very depressing place.
Oh, for sure. Oh, for sure.
Yeah, with all the news going on, with all the new stuff going on, I generally find people are a little bit more depressed on the tech side of things, especially with how the world is going this couple of years. It's especially depressing, and people are feeling hurt and sad. And I think what you're doing over there with like inserting a little bit of joy here and there, it's very lovely.
Yeah, I think it's also important. So over the years, I was very much just interested in tech very often. Just over the last 2-3 years, I figured out that working in web development is also not just tech, right? It is kind of also being a good team player, kind of maybe figure out what your career path should be, maybe kind of be inclusive, maybe how to do pair programming, right? It's way more than just, hey, this is how JavaScript works, or this is how you use CSS Grid or whatever. I also try to include these kind of in the other 50% kind of area, because honestly, it took me 5 to 6 years to realize that all these kind of other skills are also important for me to be a kind of a person working in the web. So maybe someone makes this discovery a little bit earlier. That would be nice.
That would be nice. Maybe someone who is listening to this makes this discovery a little bit earlier too. Yeah, let's go. I mean, myself, I have this thing where I'm thinking about including stuff. So what I did was I actually included stuff that is not tech related in my blog. And my style right now so far is 1 article a week. And I kind of try to space it out so I do not burn myself out writing articles. I'm the kind that write articles more than curate stuff, I noticed. So I might as well continue just writing stuff, or once in a while share stuff. I don't know. And then there was a period of time where I wrote a lot more of non-tech stuff than tech stuff. And then I started to feel icky about it. Like, why am I writing all this non-tech stuff in the tech newsletter? And because I only have 1 article a week, it's especially hard on me at that point. But I do see what you mean. I do see what you mean. And I'm planning to split up stuff. For example, like maybe create a new blog and say, hey, this is what I wrote there. If you're interested, go there. Then this is here. Like tech stuff is tech stuff. Other stuff is other stuff. That could be a good strategy too. Like it makes me happier anyway, at least.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is important to kind of for people consuming content. They have to know what they're getting, basically, right? So for Web Weekly, I'm intentionally was like, hey, you work in the web, probably in front-end world. This is what will help you and will give you a good day. So it was particularly more vague, right? So if we now would take another example, like let's just pick Jay's Weekly again, right? If there would be an article about leadership in there and was like, what's that?
Yeah,
it doesn't belong here. So for Web Weekly, I think that makes a lot of sense. And there we're back kind of at the topic where I probably agree with you that it probably should be a different blog. If you really switch topics, right? Because people aren't subscribed for a reason, because you give them a value proposition was like, hey, you subscribe or you come here to learn or to get that. If you flip that around, it's probably a good idea to create another area, another niche to kind of cater to. And a good example for that is, so Chris Coyer, right, runs CSS Tricks, right? But he also has a few other different blogs, and one of them is Email is Good. And he just jots down random thoughts about email. Should that go on to CSS Tricks? Well, probably not. So I think you're again on point here with a different blog, different URL, something. I think that makes sense.
Yeah, Chris Coyle also has his personal blog as well, which is a joy to read sometimes.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep. We're about time on, we're about 1 hour into the conversation now. I want to be mindful of time. So let's quickly wrap up. And the final thing I'd like to ask for you is, can you tell us where we can find you?
You can find me on my website. It's stefanjudis.com. That is pretty much it. I am on Twitter a lot. Basically, I'm everywhere with just my name. So it's StefanJudis, pretty much everywhere. And other than that, yeah, I hang out on Twitter a lot. And this was so much fun here. Man, we should do that again.
Yeah, it's so much fun talking to you, Stefan. Let's do it again.
Sweet.
See you. Bye-bye.
Tschüss.